Where are we? Now, if you can keep the windows on the right side of your screen if you want, because nothing is going to be over that far. I would like to start with a little disclaimer. This is going to be a presentation that is not going to be filled with chemical formulations, equations, anything that might potentially put you to sleep unless you're a chemistry freak. That would keep you awake. Can everybody hear me all right? Everybody just thumbs up something. Everybody can hear me? I'm not muted? Okay, excellent. All right. So it's going to be, this is a big picture look at hard seltzer. It's always been my belief that you don't necessarily know how to build an engine to drive a car. So it's nice to eventually know that, but to get started on it and get moving, you don't need to know how to build the engine. So that's what this is going to be. So, continuing on, just a brief history of hard seltzer for fun and profit, especially profit. As everybody knows, the first known production of hard seltzer did occur in ancient Egypt, as shown by this ancient cartouche that was unearthed by down in the valley of the Google Images just recently, showing the Egyptian brewmaster showing frankincense to a taster who was being comforted by a dog person. This is where hard seltzer started. However, a little more modern history of hard seltzer. Again, as everybody knows, it really only started about in the last 6 months, possibly 2 years, maybe 3 years. And the major producers have really taken advantage: Boston Beer, Mark Anthony Group, Molson Coors, AB InBev, Capital Brewing. They've really taken advantage of this particular product and collectively have earned easily $200 to $300 trillion in this short time. It's absolutely amazing how much money can be made with hard seltzer. Sure, it's convenient also to have the marketing machine behind you that can buy Super Bowl ads at $10 million a second. And that's why, you know, as large companies, they can stick their little tongues out at us. But we're not going to get into details here. You do want to ask yourself a series of questions. Do your research. Same thing as you would for any beer. Do your research ahead of time. That will save you so many problems down the road. Basically, what other hard seltzers are in my market? You know where you are. You know what your market is. What other hard seltzers are there? What flavors are the most prevalent? If you've got 10 hard seltzers on the shelf and they're all lime flavored, you might want to try a different flavor, unless you think you've got a particularly good lime flavor, but then you don't have a $10 million marketing machine behind you either. So that goes right into question 2. Can I compete alongside question 1? If both of those, if the answer to question 2 is yes, then continue on. Start looking at flavors. There are any number of different flavors. As everybody knows, the world is full of flavors, among other things. Frankincense is probably not a good one. That was good in ancient Egypt, but I wouldn't go today. It lends a slightly dusty flavor to the hard seltzer, and it's a little hard on the palate. So ask yourselves, cans or bottles? What size? Does anybody have a bottled hard seltzer out there? I haven't seen them, but that doesn't mean that it can't be done. However, has anybody tried to source cans lately? I can't imagine the problems that people are having sourcing aluminum cans these days. Most hard seltzer comes in what they call the slim can. I don't think that's absolutely necessary. I think it fits in small hands much easier, but that's just my humble opinion. But sourcing cans is an absolute consideration. If you can't get cans, you only have one other choice if you want to make hard seltzer. Bottles, growlers, tap rooms, obviously, they're having issues these days, so it'd be pretty hard to move it in your tap room. Looking at what's on the market, what price point do you have to meet? Where do you want to be do you want to be a premium hard seltzer? Do you want to be a budget hard seltzer, or somewhere in between? These are all questions that you have to ask yourself. Most people ask themselves question 6 without really even thinking about it. That's probably the first question that most people ask. Why isn't my boss asking these questions? And why me, God? Why me? So, but barring that frivolity, do you want a water clear seltzer or can it be a little cloudy? That's a consideration when it comes to process, but it's an important consideration, along with what kind of hard seltzer do you want to make? The neutral alcohol base that goes into the hard seltzer. Do you want to make a sales gravity? Should it be 4.5%, 5% ABV when it's finished? Do you want to make a high gravity, say starting around 20 Plato and coming in at 10, 11% ABV when you're done? Or do you want to just go hog wild and do very high gravity neutral alcohol base? I personally have done neutral malt base with a 20% malt and 80% liquid dextrose component at 32 Plato and fermented that to 18% ABV in 7 days. I have a little certificate that I have right up here on the wall. I'm not going to show it to anybody, but I have a little certificate. It can be done. Very high gravity is a little unusual for some people, but it can be done, and it is quite economical. If you have a 15% ABV finished product and your hard seltzer on the market is 5%, you have 3 times more liquid. So out of your 10-barrel brew house, you now have 30 barrels worth of finished product. I'm not really going to get into the details of question 10, although I do believe there is some validity in subliminal messaging. I think everybody needs to take this into consideration. I think the presenter would be fascinated to know what your opinions are.
Yeah. Just called back in quick.
Kevin, question? I recognize Kevin Lane's voice there.
Oh, sorry, Chris. My bad.
All right. No worries. Also, talk to your distributor. Pretty much everybody's got a distributor. If they're packaging beer, you've likely got a distributor. Many people, yes, are self-distributing, but in which case, talk to yourself. But a traditional distributor has a pretty good idea of what's in the market and what sells. They know what's moving off of the shelves and what sits there gathering dust, or is pushed off the shelves by another distributor and left to rot on the floor. You don't want your product to sit on the floor and rot. So don't be embarrassed about making hard seltzer. I'm sure everybody remembers when the craft beer movement really took off 20, 30 years ago. There were purists out there who, the big boys, they make garbage. The problem is the big boys don't make garbage. It's the most highly quality controlled beer in the world. It might not be to your taste, but it's a high quality product. So and I know that there are some craft beer purists today who really regard seltzer with disdain. That, no, I'd never make hard seltzer. Okay, why not? What's the point? Why wouldn't you? Because as shown in this very highly technical and heavily researched near photo quality image, you'll be going all the way to the bank while they're screaming. I'm just saying. So where do you start? Pretty simple, actually. You've already started by asking yourself the questions. Another one of these highly technical drawings that I found somewhere shows you exactly what the process is. There are some vague areas. Cleanie thingy is kind of up in the air. Not everybody knows what a cleanie thingy is. CO2 and magic. Some people have got the magic. I'm just saying. But at the end is really where you want to be. With that, the end of this flow chart is really where you want to be, and you can be, but don't be afraid. Just jump in feet first. So most hard seltzer today is produced by blending water and sugar and then fermenting into a neutral alcohol base. I'll call it NAB on occasion. I'll mispronounce it occasionally also, but it's NAB. Which produces two important ingredients: water, which is already there, but the alcohol is the more important part, and another particularly important ingredient is the joy of creating something from nothing. And technically you haven't, it's the yeast that's done it, but let's not quibble here. Neutral alcohol base would then be diluted to the sales ABV if necessary, blended with flavors, fruits, purees, acids, CO2 added, various potential other ingredients from around the world. If you can read that. Don't do that, it's not a good idea. Pure uncut Bolivian cocaine is not a good ingredient for hard seltzer. What do you need to order to make this? What ingredients do you have to order to make all this happen? Quite simple, water. You don't really need to order water. Any big box store carries water. No, don't go to the big box store for your water. Obviously clean, potable water, just like you would use for beer. Well water, RO water, carbon filtered water, all perfectly acceptable. Tap water, essentially. I have used tap water. You do have to be a little careful that any chlorine additives to the municipal water supply doesn't affect your yeast, but you will be heating this water prior to adding yeast, and that will generally drive any chlorine or chloramines off. Sugar. Sugar is going to be your first expense. Simple sugars. Don't get complicated here. Dextrose, sucrose, fructose, whatever you can find that's reasonably inexpensive. And I've found that if you pay more than 50 cents a pound, shop around a little bit. You can get sugar for right around 50 cents a pound or less. Although honey would make an interesting, if you've got a honey source, that would make an interesting hard seltzer, neutral alcohol base. Food for thought there. Yeast, you should buy yeast. You can use your own. A lot of brewery yeasts are not really quite as suitable for neutral alcohol base. Many don't tolerate the high or very high gravity fermentations. Some really kind of peter out at about 6% ABV. Some don't really like just having sugar and nutrients. Some really need to have that malt. So I find that ordinarily a dry yeast is the best way to go, and you don't need to share. You don't need to repitch that yeast. You don't need to collect it. It's generally inexpensive enough. You can use it once. You get what you want out of it. I prefer a very neutral yeast strain that doesn't produce a lot of esters. I used to use a champagne yeast, 200 kilos at a time. I had the 1200 barrel fermenter for that, but again, another story. Pitching rates for these sorts of yeast are generally in the 100 to 300 gram per barrel range, but that can vary. It absolutely varies by the manufacturer, but talk to your yeast vendors. They will know. How are we doing on questions there, Ashley?
We do have a couple. Should I rattle some off to you before?
Sure, why not? I can't see it on my screen, so.
All right. Let's see. A couple. I will seem like we can hold on till the end. So this is a good one for right around this time. Have you found any difference in sugar source causing off flavors? I've always heard using cane sugar in sodas leaves a harsh cider taste. So that is from Mr. Matt Arbuckle.
I have not actually. A harsh cider taste generally will be an off flavor produced by the yeast, which can be controlled by fermentation or yeast strain. I've used a number of different yeasts to make neutral malt base. And again, the one that I keep coming back to is a very neutral champagne style yeast. Off flavors are generally produced by either insufficient nutrition for the yeast or basically the wrong yeast for the product. So.
Awesome. And then another one is from John Palmer. And what about oxidation from the dilution water? Not a concern, nothing to oxidize? I
have never found it to be an issue. You will be warming this water, and that will drive a good portion of the oxygen off. Ultimately, there's very little to oxidize. So even post fermentation, there should be very little to oxidize unless you've intentionally left some residual sugar in there. So I generally advise not to worry about oxidation. And most of the flavor additions, most of them will not be affected by any oxidation. So.
Yeah, I'll save the other one for post-show.
Excellent. All right. It's always a good idea to have yeast nutrients. And this was my best joke of the whole thing. Why? Because sugar is no substitute for a good meal. Ask your mother. And it's true. Think of what your brewery yeast consumes in malt-based wort. There are a number of different compounds. You have minerals, not just sugar. You have amino acids. Sugar has got nothing. Sugar is just sugar. So you need nutrients for your yeast. Otherwise, your yeast will look at this blend that you've put it into and will just, I don't think so. And I've seen that happen. People with either insufficient nutrients or just trying it and didn't put any nutrients. Poor thing, they just sat there. It was kind of embarrassing, and it took a while and a couple of days of therapy, but they finally came around. But nutrients are particularly good, and there are a number of different nutrient products out there that are most of them are a desiccated yeast product. Yeast that has been fed, a nice neutral yeast that's been fed a very high nutrient diet, lots of vitamins, minerals, and then desiccated down into a dry form. When it's rehydrated, it gives all those nutrients back up to the growing yeast. And there are some excellent ones on the market. I have my personal favorites. We'll go into that later. Dosing range can vary all over the place. You do have to check with the manufacturer and your rep. 70 to 90 grams per barrel is pretty good. There are some out there that require considerably more, upwards of 1.25 pounds, 600, 700 grams per barrel. But those are extreme specialty products, and they have so many nutrients in them that you really don't need anything else. That would be the only nutrients you need. With a lot of nutrients, they're slightly deficient in nitrogen for what the yeast needs with just sugar. I generally recommend diammonium phosphate. It's ridiculously inexpensive, and you don't use very much, but it's a fantastic nitrogen source for the yeast. DAP, though, is 18% nitrogen, so do plan your recipe accordingly. Check with your rep on what the yeast nutrient has. Too much nitrogen causes, shall we say, unusual behaviors in fermentation. The yeast basically goes insane and divides and multiplies ridiculously and generates an extreme amount of heat. It's very difficult to control fermentation temperature. I like to equate it to giving kids a truckload of Halloween candy. They bounce off the walls like crazy for a while, and then they sleep for 2 weeks. And yeah, though that is fun to watch, it's not really good for them, right? So treat your yeast like you would treat your children. Very important. Yeast need to be treated well, just like children.
I have a quick question on the nutrient side. Does unused nutrient from overdosing open a brewer up to contamination, and how would one test for leftover nutrients?
Oh, they'll settle out. I have yet to find an overdosing of nutrient issue. What could happen, though, if you might have essentially too much nitrogen, and your fermentation will simply take off. It'll be a much faster fermentation than you planned on, but I have yet to see a fermentation that has too much nutrient. Obviously, if you dump in 10 pounds per barrel of nutrient, yes, that's going to be an issue. But I haven't seen that happen yet. I don't think anybody's done that that I know of. If anybody's done that, raise your hand and we'll talk later. Good. Okay, so dose rates, and this took a while to write this title sentence. Highly accurate field studies and actual brewing done by pretty damn hardworking beer people who make really to break into hard seltzer market because there's money in it. Uh, water, yes, it's very important to dose water into your neutral alcohol base because without the water, you basically have sugar and nutrients and yeast, and that's not going to get you anywhere. However, bear in mind that adding sugar to water, sugar will displace a certain volume of water. And I've found that for every 50-pound bag of sugar, remember it usually comes in 50-pound bags, every 50-pound bag of sugar displaces about 3 gallons of water. So 500 pounds of sugar should displace just about a barrel's worth of liquid. So plan your recipes carefully. If you have say a 35 barrel brew house and you throw 500 pounds in, you're only going to want to use 34 barrels. If you've got a 10 barrel, only use 9 barrels to start if you're using 500 pounds of sugar, but plan accordingly. You certainly don't want to overfill your fermenters. I think we've all done that at some point or another and lived to regret it. Sugar, yes, sugar, very important. You need something for the yeast to ferment. Check with your suppliers. Buy locally, get online, do a Google search. Sugar is virtually everywhere in the world. It's ubiquitous, much like yeast. The closer you can get it to home, the better. Again, dose rates will vary by what you want to make. I found that about a 10 Plato works with about 270 pounds of sugar, but that can vary by kitchen by a few pounds either way, and everybody's got a different brew house / kitchen. So yeast, obviously ridiculously important for fermentation because you don't want to do a bacterial fermentation to make hard neutral alcohol base. You could, but I can't even imagine why you would. So pitching rate, again, 100 to 300 grams per barrel is really good. If you want to do 100 to 300 ounces per barrel, your vendor is going to love you and will probably buy you your next box free. Yeast nutrients, again, if you're including diammonium phosphate, generally in the 70 to 90 gram per barrel range. But some yeast nutrients require a higher dose rate, but they often include the additional nitrogen source already. So again, do your research on those, talk to your reps on those. They can fill you in on what the product is. Again, diammonium phosphate, DAP, 40 to 60 grams per barrel, dependent on what nutrients you use. And of course, dosing patients, I can't even begin to imagine that one, but 12 to 16 ounces is generally recommended. If you want to continue on and do 24 and then 36 ounces, just don't drive. So now that you've got your ingredients, what are you going to do? You need to start mixing this. And as demonstrated in this highly accurate picture of a brewer down in Edinburgh, Texas, lifting sugar barrels, always lift with the knees because these bags are heavy. And though a single 50-pound bag may not seem so bad, 5 50-pound bags, once you get through a pallet or two, it's going to get a little tiring. So do be careful. Where do you want to mix this? Kettle, mash tun. I've had differing opinions across the board from folks I've talked with. Most people go into the mash tun because, well, you have paddles there and you can adjust temperatures. Makes it a lot easier. Sugar does dissolve a little bit better in warm water than it does in cold. So I recommend the mash tun, but it's personal choice. You can do it wherever you want. If you've got a separate system, the big boys have separate systems altogether. They don't even bother with the brew house. Separate sugar, water blending rooms and another blending room just for the flavorings and acids, and a separate carbonating room, and then a separate room where the green dancing girls live. So a little bit better looking process here. Start heating the water, the amount of water that you're going to use for your batch, and then start adding sugar. Let it dissolve thoroughly. Get it up to 150 to 165 degrees, in that range. A good 20 minutes worth, a minimum of 20 minutes worth is normally sufficient to sterilize the liquid. I've had some folks boil sugar water and it did start to darken a little bit. you really don't want a Maillard reaction going unless you're considering a cola flavored seltzer, and then you've got the color built right in. But I found that 150 to 165 for a minimum of 20 minutes is sufficient to kill bacteria. You should have a reasonably clean brewery to begin with, so there shouldn't be a lot of spores flying in from outside. You shouldn't have visitors coming by sneezing COVID into the kettle, viruses, etc. You know, if you're practicing good manufacturing practices, you've got a good HACCP plan going, this should be sufficient for sterilizing the liquid. Just prior to knockout, you want to add, if your recipe calls for it, you would add the diammonium phosphate at this point, allow it to dissolve properly, and then plan the rest of your day. Cooling depends entirely on what your recipe calls for, what your yeast has called for. My personal favorite is cooling to 55 Fahrenheit and then allowing fermentation to rise to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. However, there are some yeasts out there that love a considerably warmer temperature, shall we say, that ferment at 95 degrees Fahrenheit. In which case, I wouldn't cool to 55 because it'll take the poor yeast a while to get up to temperature. At 95 Fahrenheit fermentation temperature, I would probably cool to 75 or 80, maybe a little higher. But again, everybody's brew house is different. Do what works best for you. If you can dose your yeast and nutrient in line going into the fermenter, this is the place for that. If not, I've had a lot of people that just start to fill their fermenter, dump the yeast and the nutrient directly into the fermenter, close the door, continue filling. Aeration is I've found not quite as important here, although many dry yeast manufacturers tell you don't need to aerate at all. And I've found that in some cases that's true, but in other cases it isn't. I prefer aerating, and with average gravity, I would aerate at about the same rate you would for beer, about 8 ppm. For high gravity and very high gravity, I like to aerate just a bit higher, 10 to 12 ppm. I found success with that versus lower aeration rates. And I've had personal experience with this. I've experimented with various levels. Obviously, it's different for everybody, but this has been my experience. The high temperature yeasts, 3-4 days, you can finish fermentation pretty quickly. The lower temperatures, on average, you should be about 7 days. You can start on Monday, and the following Monday you can crash cool it. Generally, you should be testing every day gravity, temperature and gravity, and at least recording those, so that you can get a good fermentation curve plotted. Without that information, you're having to rely on your memory, and I would rely on my memory, but I can't remember where I left it. So once fermentation has completed, and you will likely wind up in the -1 to -2 Plato range, depending on what gravity you've started with. So it should completely end ferment. You should have no sugar left whatsoever. Cool it down. 32 degrees is just fine. 32 degrees is optimal. 34 is okay. I like to keep it as cold as possible. That drops the yeast and any residue completely out. At this point, start checking. How does this look? You should be doing this all along anyway, every day of fermentation. But once it's done, you should absolutely check and see what you've created. Higher temperatures generally, as everybody knows, tends to produce more esters. The yeast will kick out a lot more esters, which aren't necessarily a desirable feature in a neutral alcohol base. And how I define a neutral alcohol base is water, alcohol, and that's it. You have no esters, no aromas. The only flavor is alcohol, which is not much of a flavor, as everybody knows who's tried Everclear. So higher temperatures do tend to kick out more esters, which The advantage of higher temperature is it takes less time. The disadvantage is you will produce more esters, which will likely have to be cleaned out. But again, if your recipe calls for esters, do it. Don't be afraid. However, be aware that those esters can interfere with the flavorings that you add. They may well enhance the flavors, but they could possibly have detrimental effects with the flavors as well. I don't know what every flavor in the world is and what their compositions are, so I can't say definitively that nothing will happen. Something is going to happen. So your gravity checks every day. Don't be afraid if your final pH after fermentation drops, or at end of fermentation drops into the 3 range. I've seen 2.9 pH. I've seen 4.6 pH following fermentation. Again, varies by the techniques people use to get to that point. Don't worry about a 3 pH. I should actually go back in pH in the sugar wort, or swart as I'm going to call it, coming out of the brew house. Your pH might be a little low there. Don't bother with trying to buffer anything. I found that if folks that have tried to buffer to get closer to what beer wort is, they wind up with fermentation issues. So don't worry about that. 99% of the commercial dry yeasts out there will easily handle the pH that comes out of the brew house. So don't worry about that. So you're cooled down. Look at your product. Is it clear? Do you want it clear? Work on filtration. That's coming up in the next slide. However, you will still have to add flavor, CO2, and maybe other additives, but ultimately you wind up down in the lower left.
Before we move on, I do have a couple fermentation and upstream questions.
Okay.
So one being, why not add the organic or full spectrum nutrient while on the hot side with the DAP?
Generally, yeast nutrients contain vitamins, which can be denatured by higher temperatures. And if you're paying all the extra money for organic nutrients, why kill your vitamins right off of the bat?
Excellent. Another one is, are we doing, so let's say we're using a normal yeast strain that we use in-house. Do we need to do a diacetyl rest?
No.
Awesome.
Now, ask yourself, why not?
My answer would be because we don't have all the VDK and precursors and all that that I think originate from malt.
Exactamundo. You've got nothing to turn into diacetyl.
Awesome. That's such a nice, comfortable place to be, man. And then a couple questions about Kveik yeast strains. Kveik. I don't know how to pronounce it. If you can pronounce it, great. And mentioning sometimes we have some Everclear tasting like fruit punch. And so, yeah, so I think the 95-degree fermentation was probably very specifically referencing those types of strains. So.
There are others, actually. Other dry yeasts that are geared toward neutral alcohol base specifically. I don't want to name any names. Call me after the show and we'll talk. Kveik, whatever, is geared specifically toward high temperature fermentation, but also gives a lot of flavor to the beer. And though it may be a very fast fermentation, I suspect that you don't want those flavors in your finished neutral alcohol base. So again, neutral as possible.
Excellent. I think that's what we got for now. Yep, all cleared up.
But again, there are some strains, there are some yeast strains specifically designed for neutral alcohol base. Excellent yeast, high temperature tolerant, high alcohol tolerant, very good for very high gravity, 30 Plato easily fermentations. There are also distiller's yeast. There are a lot of distiller's yeasts that work very well for this. All right, so you have a finished neutral alcohol base. Start asking yourself these questions. Is it clear? No. Okay, now do I want it clear? Yes. So now you have to do something. My recommendation is activated carbon. We'll get to that in a minute. If you don't want it clear, fine, make history. Have a cloudy hard seltzer. That's okay. You can do it. You can do anything you want. So if it is clear, is it already at sales ABV? Yes. Proceed on to the next step. No. Make sure you dilute it down. You don't want to put 8% alcohol, neutral alcohol base with flavors into a can that says 5% ABV and sell it to the public. You can certainly keep it for yourself, but I wouldn't sell it to the public. Flavoring additions, acids, again, we'll get to that shortly. Package your product. CO2, by the way, I've seen everywhere from 2.6 volumes per volume to 3.2 volumes. So it varies greatly. So, you don't have clear seltzer or neutral alcohol base, but you want to. So, frequently the gods of fermentation play their funny little tricks on us, and this is demonstrated quite clearly when making neutral alcohol base. I prefer neutral alcohol base that is water clear, because then I know that there is and no aroma as well. Then I know that there's nothing in there that will interfere with any flavor that I decide to put in. Many years ago, I made a product called Hooper's Hooch using a neutral malt base, and that had to be cleaned with carbon in order to get the esters out, because the esters combined with the flavoring additives. They were actually orange juice and lemon juice flavorings, and they created a horrible afterbitter taste, and we called it very scientifically yuck. But there are a number of options you can do, and this is probably the next easiest part of the entire process. Binding agents. Okay, binding agents can work. Don't necessarily pull out esters. PVPP is normally geared toward polyphenol removal. You shouldn't really have any polyphenols, but I've seen it work. Silica, generally geared toward protein removal. Again, there shouldn't be any protein in here, but I have seen it work. Isinglass, if you've got any goldfish in your fermenter, it will take the goldfish right out. Thyme works beautifully. Magic works even better. So if anybody's has got a degree from Hogwarts, little hand-waving magic works wonders at clearing up. RO filtration, fantastic. I love RO. It's a little on the pricey side. RO filters tend to run anywhere from low 6 figures up to high 7 figures. They can all different kinds. DE filters, pressure leaf with DE and carbon, or plate and frame filter with carbon impregnated pads, another option. One downside there though is with a pressure leaf filter, DE, everybody knows DE is quite dusty. Powdered carbon is considerably more dusty than DE. So the personal protective equipment that you need essentially constitutes a hazardous waste suit. You could probably do COVID testing at the same time with the same outfit on. It's very dusty. It's effective, but it's just a pain to put together. I've done it. It's unpleasant, but it can be done. Plate and frame filters, often you can get carbon impregnated pads for those. However, I've found that on average across all vendors, there's no more than a pound of activated carbon per square meter of sheet of pad surface. And the average brewer has got, say, a 40 by 40 centimeter with 40 plates, plate and frame. That's only 6.4 square meters. So in a filter that you could normally run 20 barrels, 25 barrels an hour through, you've only got 6 pounds of carbon on this thing. So it's not, there's just not enough. The amount of carbon is limited, and the contact time. Contact time with carbon is all important. Now, granular activated carbon is a fantastic choice. I love it. I've used it before. It's very inexpensive. It's not particularly dusty. Depending on the manufacturer, some manufacturers have a low hardness value, and that does tend to crush pretty easily, but find a granular activated carbon with a high hardness number and a high iodine number. And the high iodine number indicates the adsorptive capacity of that particular carbon. It's very simple to use. I recommend about a pound of granular activated carbon per barrel of neutral alcohol base that you want to filter. You can put it into a mesh bag, a hop bag. I've seen people put it into their in a mesh bag and then put it into their trap filters. I've seen people put it into CIP, clean CIP system tanks, mobile CIP units, and it's very simple. You want to rinse it. You want to make sure to rinse it though. Ideally, if you've got a 1 or 2 barrel tank just happen to be laying around somewhere, that's ideal because then you can reserve it just for the granular activated carbon. I'm sure there'll be plenty on the market, so keep your eyes open for used equipment. Anyway, put the carbon in the tank, roughly one pound of carbon per barrel of NAB. If you don't want to put it in a bag, you can use normally about a number 30 mesh screen gasket, and those are available in triclover versions. They're available in DIN fitting gaskets as well. Use that at the outlet. You do not need to be under pressure here. Ideally, put the fermenter after you've removed the yeast. Do remove the yeast first. Put the fermenter under pressure. 10 pounds is more than sufficient, just enough to push it through the carbon, and then a small pump to equilibrate your flow back into the tank. Run that for 12 hours, 24 hours. You can start it in the morning and check it in the evening and see if it's done its job. If not, let it run all night, check it in the morning. It should have completed by morning. Granular activated carbon is fantastic for pulling out esters. Also, if by chance there was any color involved in the neutral alcohol base, removes color very, very nicely. Contact time is absolutely essential. I recommend a minimum of 10 tank turnovers. So essentially with a 10 barrel tank, you're moving 100 barrels. With a 100 barrel tank, you're moving 1,000 barrels. If you plan on keeping that granular activated carbon for future use, there are ways where you can clean it up a little bit. I, in the past, have used citric acid on it, and that tends to, I've found it reactivates, although quite honestly, there is no literature anywhere to be found on this. This is personal experience. However, you do want to rinse it out. Rinse it just for 15, 20 minutes, rinse it, and then for sterility purposes, run either 200° Fahrenheit plus water through it or steam. Ideally, steam it for a half an hour, and then you will have sterile carbon ready to go for your next filtration run. Obviously, contact time is absolutely crucial. So let's see. I think flavors. I've always preferred to go local. There are some here in District Milwaukee. There are some fantastic flavor houses, just a stone's throw away. Is that a question coming up there, Madam President? My screen is moving on me. New share. Oops, nope, sorry. Sorry. Huh, no open questions. Okay, sorry. I always prefer to go local just because freight is generally cheaper and they often have what you need right away. But if you're new to this business, flavors are a unique and unusual business. And the people that represent flavor companies really know their stuff. So if you don't know your stuff, talk to them. Tell them what you want. Tell them what you want your finished product to look like. Do you want it tinted the slight color? The latest interesting find is a pumpkin spice hard seltzer with a slight orange color to it. Still clear. I know. Please, please hold your booze up until the end. But that's a possibility as well. Do you need organic flavors? The flavor house can help you there. Non-GMO, natural flavors, artificial. Do you care? You want to know what they have to offer, and they have the information for you. At the very least, flavor houses have free samples. Free samples, good. Get them to send you some free samples, which they will gleefully, maybe not with so much glee, but they'll do it happily. And then if you have some graduated 1 milliliter pipettes, they are absolutely essential. Take a liter's worth of your flavored, of your neutral alcohol base, and just play with the flavors. Obviously, talk to the flavor house. They have an idea of what the dose rate should be, but the important thing here, and remember, this is hard seltzer for fun and profit. Have fun doing this. It's like cooking. Just a little bit of this, a little dash of that, but write it down so you remember what you did. And you never know, you could find the next new flavor sensation. Do bear in mind, though, citrus flavors tend to, some citrus flavors, not all, do have a tendency to develop a haze. So if you want to maintain an absolute water clear, make sure that your flavor rep knows that. They can tailor the right citrus flavor for you. And as I mentioned here in the text, that's what they do, and they're mostly house trained. Single flavors, absolutely terrific. Flavor combinations, basil cucumber. I've had a basil cucumber hard seltzer, and it was remarkably good. But importantly, just as you would with your beer, take the utmost care with crafting this seltzer because it will reflect on you. How do you want it to reflect on you? Now, there's also the question of sweetness. Some people, to me, hard seltzer, well, to me, seltzer is water. There's no sugar in it at all, but that's not everybody's cup of tea. So some people like a slightly sweet seltzer. You are certainly welcome to sweeten your seltzer after every, along with adding flavors. Use whatever sugar source you want. I don't recommend Lucky Charms or Fruit Loops, but hey, somebody made a Fruit Loop cereal. So, and you can get Lucky Charms marshmallows now at the big box stores, just the marshmallows. Whatever sugar source you want. However, bear in mind that you are making a microbiological time bomb if you add sugar. If you can't package, if you can't do everything aseptically from this point on, consider buying a pasteurizer. And again, we'll talk afterwards. However, in lieu of a budgetary pasteurizer purchase, you could use a preservative. Potassium sorbate is highly recommended. Doses are generally 0.025 to 0.1%, which is the equivalent of between 25 and 100 milligrams of potassium sorbate in 100 grams of solution. Now remember, your solution is pretty close to 1. It might be a little bit under 1. So do your calculations carefully here. 0.1% potassium sorbate is the FDA maximum recommended limit. It will control the growth of yeasts, molds, small children, irritable dogs. It will take care of all of that. Because the last thing you want is you've made a wonderful, you put all sorts of sweat and effort into making a wonderful hard seltzer. You've back sweetened it, and now one of those radical craft beer purists is using them to attack Bolivia because they're now hand grenades. So be very, very aware of sweetness. You don't have to, but again, it's your customer base. Do what they want. So a number of miscellaneous things that just sort of dawned on me after all of this. Citric acid, oddly enough, can enhance the flavors of citrus flavors. Go figure. Many citrus flavors just aren't that strong. So a little bit of citric acid can sort of round them out and soften them a bit. Same goes for malic acid with berries and stone fruit flavors. And this applies to both fresh fruit and flavor concentrates. You can certainly use fresh fruit, but again, with fresh fruit, you're looking, or fruit purees, you are looking at adding sweetness. So do be careful about the microbiological aspect. Can't find any cans? You could be the first on your block to have bottled hard seltzer on the market. You never know. Don't be afraid. Innovate. This is why we're in the business, right? Talk to your can supplier. If you manage to source cans, make absolutely sure that they know that this is going to be a hard seltzer with a low pH, with flavorings and potentially acids in it. The linings have to be absolutely appropriate to that liquid. Play. The most important thing I can say here is play. This is supposed to be fun. We're in one of those jobs that aren't really jobs, except when we have to deal with people. Do something you love and you'll never work a day in your life. But this is actually one of those cases. This gives you the opportunity to play, albeit on a deadline, because the boss is probably looking over your shoulder saying, hey, the distributor wants it tomorrow. But nonetheless, play a little bit. Herbs, spices, there are any number of different flavor combinations. I really don't think pumpkin spice is the way to go, but that's up to you. So do follow good manufacturing practices. If you don't have a plan in place, get a hold of the MBAA because we can help you with that. You should have a good manufacturing practices plan. You should be following FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act. You should have a HACCP plan in place. All of these suggestions to get it going and help with that is all available with the Master Brewers Association. So with that, I think I am about done. Sorry for taking up so much of everybody's time. I'm opening the floor to questions, comments, and most importantly, purchase orders. Kidding, again, kidding, except about the purchase orders. So, all right, I will stop sharing now and give me what you got.
Yeah, I got a few great questions for you. So
no, we're not answering any questions, just purchase orders at this point.
yeah, I am going to need, I'll email you later. Yeah, so I guess I can just preface this real quick with Kris has been my kind of right-hand man to bring me through my most recent batch of hard seltzer, and it has come out wonderfully. So I highly recommend all of these things that he has suggested for you here today.
Well, look, I see questions on the side. Sorry.
Yeah. So the first one I was going to bring up is from Maddie at Potosi. Is the shelf life different for hard seltzers than beer, like storage temperatures after packaging, etc.?
Not necessarily. Again, it's a lot of people will store their beer. Will try to have their beer stored cold all the time. You can't always control that. Same thing with hard seltzer. If you've back sweetened, there is the potential for a problem, but if you've used a little preservative, a potassium sorbate, for example, then there's no issue with storage temperatures. You obviously don't want it to get hot. So summertime is a little crazy sometimes, I know, in the warehouse, but again, talk with your distributor about this. I'm sure for a sizable fee, they'll treat your product exactly as you want them to treat it. But generally, no, there shouldn't be any issues.
And then next, and you did mention that there are problems with clarity issues with the citrus flavors, or some of the citrus flavors. Do you have any suggestion for emulsifiers to help this?
No, I would instead go with a different flavor. Emulsifiers just add one more ingredient that you don't really need to pay for. I've always figured try to do it right the first time and do it with as little as you possibly have to. Don't spend as much money don't spend as much money as your vendors want you to spend. Your boss will be more than happy with you, and oftentimes you make a better product. If you throw too much in, then you've got a long ingredients label, and nobody wants to read a long ingredients label. And flavor houses have so many different flavors that if you wind up with a haze in one, tell them, this threw a haze, get me something else, and they'll get you something else. So don't be afraid to go with several different flavor houses. I've worked with 5 in the past, all simultaneously, which was a real joy with our HACCP plan with getting all the ingredients in. But it's not really as difficult as it seems. So don't be afraid. Jump in with both feet.
Yeah, and then Matt, our secretary Matt, did mention that Adam Nye, who has been a pretty active member, I haven't seen him around in a little bit, but he works for Northwestern Extract. So they do Wisconsin-based, they're a Wisconsin-based company. Then we also got another little comment in the chat box that Brewer Supply Group does also have Wisconsin-made flavors and all kinds of stuff made by Carrie and Beloit. Free samples totally available, which I can vouch for both of those guys there that, yeah, we definitely have a lot of good options with not only excellent products, but Wisconsin made products. So yeah, so check out BSG. We have someone in attendance here. So if you have questions, you're more than welcome to throw some stuff in the chat box, or just anybody's more than welcome to unmute yourselves and speak freely now. So yeah, we've got a lot of good stuff here in Wisconsin, much less, I'm sure there's plenty of other stuff around depending on what you're looking for. So
I'm just getting back a little bit to the Scandinavian Kvik, however you want it. Somebody, please.
Yeah, is there anybody who's confident?
Kvik?
Kvik.
Okay. With Kvik yeast, what it does throw, some strains do have a tendency to throw a fruit flavor. That could actually be a good option for you. So don't be afraid about that. Unusual flavors in fermentation that you didn't necessarily expect could work to your advantage. So before you go crazy, make your neutral alcohol base rather, and see what you've made. That's the nice thing about this business, is we do have the opportunity to play a little bit. We don't necessarily have the time or the money to play, but there are ways around that too, as every QA, QC, brewmaster, sneaky person about the brewery knows. And there are ways. Talk to the boss. Say, I want to do this, and I want to see what happens with this. If it doesn't work, figure out what to do with that neutral alcohol base. There are ways. You can always clean it up. With a filter or granular activated carbon. There are always options as to how to clean that up. So, Matt, salted nut rolls.
Good BSG customers get lots of salted nut rolls with their shipments.
Really?
Yeah.
I never got salted nut roll. This
We used
must
to
be
call
just recent.
We used to call it a brewer's breakfast.
Maybe I just had the wrong rep.
Yeah.
Did you ever get grain from them?
No.
The way they stacked grain on pallets, there'd be a hole in the middle, and they throw like a fistful of salted nut rolls in there. So whoever's unpacking the grain gets. It's a nice little treat.
Yeah, but Breeze would fill that with malted milk balls. Oh.
Those are really good malted milk balls.
Oh.
Yeah, we actually had a brewer who he organized all the malt and everything, and he would actually, because you get about one nut roll per order, sometimes two if it's a bigger order. So he would save all of the nut rolls until there was enough for each of the brewers, and then he would hand one out to everybody. So that was a very special Pat moment that I remember from when he used to work with us.
How magnanimous, one each.
Yeah, he was very, very organized, had everything down to a T. So
Okay, well, ultimately, do not be afraid to talk to your vendors. They're the ones who deal with these products every day. They are supposed to know what all of these products do for you. So reach out, use them extensively, because I've learned over the years that we brewers don't know everything. And now that I'm a vendor, I really don't know everything. So I have to continually learn every day. But if I'm going to tell somebody what I think they should do or what they can do, I should probably have a pretty good idea of what I'm talking about. So it's good to, what did they say at the beginning of Animal House? Knowledge is good. So talk to your vendors, use your vendors. They will help you.
yeah, and I think some of the best responses I get from vendors are, if I don't have the right answer, I'm gonna give me one moment. I know who can get me that answer, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. So yeah, they're not going to just make something up to make you happy and make a sale. They
Oh, right. I'm sorry. You were serious.
probably sometimes. However, I have had some very good experiences where they'll be like, yeah, let me get back to you, and I will tell you for sure. And yeah, so.
Okay. So this should be available on either the Facebook page or up on the District Milwaukee section of the website.
Yep, we will. Yeah, so we'll put the recording. So yeah, the Master Brewers website does not. We can post the slides. So so you can send me your your slides from the presentation, and I can post those in PDF form. And then we will, I think the grand idea of future projects for District Milwaukee is to start our own YouTube channel, which was Steve's wonderful idea. So we're gonna, try to get all of our tech presentations together. And not every presenter is from a vendor who can just willingly give out their information to share freely among the public, and we totally respect that. But those who do, we will absolutely post those, not only the video from webinars and stuff like this, but also the presentation slides. So
okay, there are still a couple more questions too, but I did want to mention, if anybody wanted to get in touch with me to talk further about this, I'm more than happy to talk ad nauseum about these sorts of things. And it's my consultation fees are ridiculously low, generally 12 ounces, sometimes 16 ounces. So but I can be contacted with my contact information is on in the District of Milwaukee section of the MBAA website. Look for district officers, and I'm right up there. Now, a couple more questions. John, you mentioned, last slide mentioned microbe nightmare. Yes, anytime you have sugar, yes, you have a.
Oh, that's for the sweetened seltzers then?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Generally, if you've end fermented and there's no residual sugar left in your neutral alcohol base, there often is not any sugar in commercially available flavor extracts. Fruit, of course, yes, there will be residual sugar. You're going to need to either pasteurize or just serve out of your tap room or preserve. Potassium sorbate. I like potassium sorbate a little bit better than sodium benzoate. It's a bit more stable. Years and years, well, probably 60 years ago, some of the large soda companies that will go unnamed at this point discovered that excessive heat in storage warehouses can cause sodium benzoate and the benzoic acid that it produces to break down into benzene. And they promised, the FDA promised with their right hands in the air that they would inform the industry about it. They didn't, but the information did manage to make it out. So you do have to be careful with preservatives. You really don't want to expose your packaged product to excessively high temperatures. Some warehouses can get up well over 100 degrees. You don't want your beer in there either. So a good distributor will keep that at a little more conditioned. So, but yes, if you have a sugar in your product, you have potential to be a microbiological nightmare. Rob, let's see. Yes. Yeah, I talked with Kris about that. Bubbling CO2 up through the fermenter to help rid esters. It can work. It doesn't always. By all means, try it. It could work for your system. It doesn't clean up all flavors and all aromas necessarily. But if you've only got one or two esters that have been produced, it could very well work. It's a classic way to clean up beer. People have had issues with that. I should have mentioned also sulfur. If you wind up with sulfur in your finished or during fermentation, then you probably haven't used enough yeast nutrients. Sulfur tends to be kicked out by this yeast with insufficient nutrition. So anyway, bubbling CO2 will, yes, that can help tremendously. Let's see. If I'm using GAC, how many runs can I get with it if I need to? Oh yeah. If I'm using GAC, how many runs can I get with it if I clean it up with citric acid solution? And at what concentrations do you recommend? Good question. Normally you can get 50% citric acid solution from your chemical vendor. That's a little strong. I've had personal experience with between 30 and 40% citric acid and soaking or circulating that across your granular activated carbon bed. And I've been able to, and then collect it, use it for something else, rinse with water, seal it back up, keep it sanitary. I have personally been able to use it at least 3 more times, sometimes 4 more times. It's almost as if it reactivates it. And granular activated carbon is actually activated by strong acid. I recommend citric acid because nobody wants to be using nitric acid. Phosphoric acid for the brew house, if you're tempering your water, is bad enough. But 30 to 40% citric acid is sufficient for that. And usually I've been able to use it several more times. So I wouldn't worry too much. Just be very careful. Strong acids, bad. Strong acids, bad. Hitting yourself in the head with a hammer, bad. Same sort of thing. You don't want to get hurt by this. Personal protective equipment, good manufacturing practices, HACCP, and ideally get somebody else to do it. Let's see. Would you say the hardest part of this whole equation is getting the nutrition needs to match the needs of the yeast variety you have chosen? No, actually the hardest part is dumping those damn sugar bags one at a time. Simple calculation. If you can work up a recipe, you can certainly do the calculations for getting the nutrition needs for your particular yeast strain. And the really nice thing is you don't have to. The person that you buy the nutrients from and the yeast from should do that for you. Then get the math from them and then double check their equations. The key is nitrogen. You certainly want to have vitamins and minerals and everything that's good for yeast. But again, lean on your vendors. Let them do the work for you. That's what they're there for. And it's not particularly difficult. Calculating a quantity of nitrogen needed in a particular liquid is reasonably simple. I've had several beers at this moment, so I'm not going to do those calculations now. Let's see.
I was just going to add in that actually the first batch of seltzer I did was in conjunction with Fermentis testing out the Spring Firm nutrients. So they have done actual kind of field trials with a bunch of different, not just me. I was doing it at basically fermenting at serving strength, but they've done high gravity, all kinds of stuff. So they aren't just going to be throwing numbers at you theoretically. They have people testing all the stuff out before they release it to you as surefire information that they trust and they stand behind. So it's not just numbers and equations. They do have trials and data to back that up.
Yeah, and being one of the biggest yeast companies in the world, if not the biggest, they've got some really, really smart people working for them. So again, rely on your vendors. They should know what they're doing. If your vendor goes, I don't know, you might want to look at a different vendor, or at least ask for a different rep. One of those. But don't put all this on yourself. This is a brand new field. For most of us, seltzer is a brand new field. Neutral alcohol base is a brand new field. But did you have the same trepidation brewing your first beer or making your first IPA? Or if you're just an ale brewer, did you have any major trepidation brewing your first lager? It's the same thing. Yeah, you've got little nerves. You want it to work out right the first time. But who did you rely on to get all that information? It just didn't all come out of your head. You had to have some help. And if you didn't, then kudos, excellent. But I find it's always important to rely on those people that are smarter than I am to help me do my work. So let's see, Kyle, CO2 sparging will definitely pick up small volatile organics, not heavier ones. Excellent point. As a nice side bonus, it will strip out dissolved oxygen, which we obviously love, absolutely. The nice thing is that neutral alcohol base in its purest form, there's virtually nothing there to oxidize. So you don't have to worry so much about dissolved oxygen. When you start adding sugar, flavors, fruits, purees, whatever it is, then you've added something in that can be oxidized. So then you do want to start being careful. But just as it is coming out of the fermenter, there should not be a whole lot to oxidize there. So, all right, no other questions?
I have a question / comment on the cloudy, hazy versus super clear. We've done all of our hard seltzers on draft only because we've just mostly done them through our tap room. And I was actually very surprised. So I've used some natural flavoring, so some Wisconsin cranberry and cherry juice. And I was actually very surprised to see that one of the quickest selling seltzers that was one that did have a little hint of color and a little bit of cloudiness to it. And so that was, and I think being served on draft, you actually see it there. They have the glass in their hands, where I think most cans, I don't think anybody, like a lot of people probably couldn't tell you if their seltzer was clear or colored or not. But so yeah, so being on draft, I was really, really nervous that that was gonna kind of blow back on me, but you can't get Wisconsin natural Door County cherry juice or cranberry juice in colorless extract form. Now I think I know I could probably run it through some activated carbon now that that has come into my life. But
Well,
so yeah.
it's what you add. It's what you add that causes that haze. But Maddie's got a good question. Did the customers want more?
Yeah, they said there was, actually, I think, quote one bartender, there's a huge table of bros that just keep coming back for the Seabreeze hard seltzer. And so, yeah, so it was a very, like, and it was the third flavor we released, and it was the first one to run out. So that was yeah, that I was nervous that that was going to be a holdup, that I was going to kind of need to either do a process or just use colorless extracts. But I was very happily surprised that my cranberry grapefruit flavor called Seabreeze was a big hit. So I actually made a second batch of it. And
Ashley, if you were to run that through carbon, it would strip out that fruit flavor.
yep,
That
makes sense.
Yeah. And there's my point. It doesn't have to be water clear. So if you've got a product you know is going to be a little cloudy and that's what your customers want, don't worry about the cloudiness.
Yeah, I think maybe even throwing the word natural on there, I think people are okay seeing colors and stuff and just know like, oh, it's because there's real stuff in here. Like, I think that's like kind of a little bit of a, yeah, just something that make customers not give a shit. Just like, it's natural, it's fine, don't worry about it. Yeah, that's my, so yeah, I was gonna see, I guess I got some good feedback on the questions that were in there. And if glitter beer, yeah.
But more importantly, did you have fun playing with those flavors?
Heck yeah. Yeah, so that's the other thing too. The first few things I've noticed, I really like more tart and sour flavors. So I got some good feedback that people said that they wouldn't normally like something as tart, but they enjoyed it. So yeah, second batch I restrained a little more of that tartness and added a couple other flavors that weren't grapefruit and cranberry. But so yeah, so that was it was fun.
When you were originally playing with all those flavors, did you like set up a bunch of glasses with the clear liquid in it and dose each glass and taste them? Is that how you came up with what you wanted to do?
I would like to say I did it in a really reproducible and scientific testing form, but I didn't. So and what I did for my first couple batches, so we have a small system, and so I did about 8-ish barrels of regular strength hard seltzer, so the NAB, if that's okay to call it that when it's at serving strength. But and then we just kind of moved a third at a time into the bright tank and dosed it with flavor, so we could just kind of again play around with different flavors. So yeah, so while it was still kind of before putting any flavors in, I again got a whole bunch of free samples from Northwestern Extract, from BSG, and just kind of, and actually I think Amaretti, I think everybody has gotten a free sample from Amaretti in their lifetime, in one place or another.
Just for breakfast.
Yeah, right. And so so I had a whole bunch of different samples from a bunch of different vendors, and just kind of saw, and just like I would with a fruit flavored beer, what tastes, I really like to go for natural flavors, and I was very pleasantly surprised with some of the flavors I got that I was expecting something more synthetic. But my most recent seltzer release is called Peach Fizz, and so it's like it's reminiscent of the like brandy peach like frozen slushy that you top up with 7-Up, and so it's lemon lime and then peach flavor, which I am very hesitant to use anything fake peach, but my coworker said it tastes like biting into a fresh peach, and I've got a lot of really good feedback from it. So yeah, so I have a little bit of a extract or flavoring synthetic kind of worry that it's not going to taste as good as fresh natural product, but the science is there and the technology is there that even in some straight up, alcohol-based extracts, they're tasting almost as good, if not better, than the fresh pureed product, because it's easier to work with and they can kind of capture the flavor rather than when fruit tends to age, it changes flavor a lot. So
not only that, don't be afraid about marketing your products. How many products have marketed themselves with, this is the best in the world? And really? You're sure about that? Don't be afraid to be a little creative with your marketing. I mean, don't lie about it, obviously, but marketing goes a long way for your customers. Creative names, ingredients, etc. Food products are not just to be consumed. They're also, there's a sensory, there's a visual in it, and there's an aspect in the brain. If you see a name that you like, it's like, oh, well, I have to try that. But I'm the first one to say that people don't buy beer, people are sold beer. People don't just go, oh, what have you got for me now? No, here, I've got this for you. And that's what the major companies do in the world. This is what you need. Buy it now. So it's market. Don't underestimate the value of marketing. Maddie has a question. How would you add hop flavor similar to the Lagunitas hop water? Barring actually taking a can of Lagunitas hop water and pouring it into your cans. There are hop extracts out there that are perfectly suitable for adding straight into water. I can talk with you more about that. There are a number of companies that do it. Also, do give my best to Dave, and I have talked to Amy about this in the past. So,
and anybody who does, again, we try not to be totally a commercial for certain products, but anybody who's here, feel free to jump in and tell us what your company has. Obviously, yeah, we talked about BSG, so please feel free to jump in and tell us more. Or anybody else who's in there who has any.
Well, you can get hop extracts almost anywhere these days.
Yeah.
I think you can get them at 7-Eleven too, but they're a little more expensive there because they're tiny little bottles of it. But no, hop extracts, and we actually did a trial. My colleague right below you, N. Metzger, hi Nick. We did a trial using a particular hop extract, a series of hop extracts, and Bud Light. Okay, pour half a cup of Bud Light. Now take extract A, 2 drops. Okay, good. Smell that, taste it. Okay, very good. Now take extract B, 3 drops. Okay, oh, that's pretty good too. By the time we were done, it tasted like a Northeast IPA from Bud Light. Strangest thing in the world. So what they have done, what a lot of several companies have done with hop extracts it's absolutely remarkable what sort of components they can extract from different hops. So that's all publicly available information. And hi, I'm the public. Anything you want to know, if I don't have it, again, I can find it for you.
Yeah, Kris, I think you're right. I've listened to you, how much the vendors can support us. I'm aware that depending on the volume a brewer is interested in making, that Kerry based in Beloit will even do the laboratory work. Mm-hmm. You bring your fermented base, they can add the flavor. You say, oh, I want it to taste like this or that, like White Claw, I want it to be this flavor, I want this upfront, and they will do that for you. But of course, it's based on the volume you're going to buy from.
Absolutely.
At the end of the day.
Yeah, if you're only buying a gallon of it, they're not likely to do as much work for you. But if you put pallet orders in, They'll
Yeah.
come to you.
Yeah. So just that will help Michael. I mean, don't worry about the science of adding the flavors. If you don't have the time for that, just bring your fermented beers up to carry there and they will do that for you.
Yeah.
But I think it's based on your volume.
Now, at ATP Group, we will come to you. I'm just saying, we come to you with the flavors. I've got them in my refrigerator right now. So, but again, rely on your vendors. That's what they're there for. We're all in this business together. You know, some of us used to make beer. Some of us came from municipal garbage collection. But nonetheless, we're all passionate about what we do, and we all drink beer, and mostly to excess. So we vendors do tend to know what we're talking about. I've met some vendors that really had no concept whatsoever, and I think I was explaining myself fairly clearly. Just, oh, well, I don't know much, so I got a new vendor, and sure enough, the next one was very good. So not everybody is great. You have to have those interpersonal relationships, which I realize is difficult in this time, but yikes, I know I haven't been out of the house for